Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the second episode of our Securing AI Apps on Azure series, Add User Login to AI Apps Using Built-in Authorization. My name's Anna. I'm an event planner for Reactor, joining you from Sudbury, Massachusetts. Before we start, I do have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and our presenters. And while we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional, and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We will be dropping helpful links and checking for questions for our presenters to answer live. This session is being recorded. It'll be available to view on demand within 24 to 48 hours on the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. With that, I am thrilled to turn it over to Pamela and James. Thank you both of you for joining us today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second session in Securing AI Apps on Azure. Last week, we talked about keyless auth with Marlene and I, and this week is all about user login. So today, we've got James Casey and I talking about built-in auth, and then tomorrow, I'll be talking with Ray about the MSL SDK. And then on Wednesday, I'll be looking at user auth for a spa app. So basically, if you want to add user login to your app, this is the week to be watching these streams. And of course, they will be recorded so that you can catch up and rewatch later. So I'm Pamela Fox. I'm from the Python Cloud Advocacy team, which means it's my job to help Python developers be more successful with Microsoft products. And then we've got James. So James, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm James Casey. I'm a product manager on Microsoft Entra, and I work on developer experience for Entra.
It is so cool to have somebody from Entra joining us so that we can, hear it straight from the source. So our goal today is to be able to take an AI application, like in this example, one that is, a chat with an OpenAI model, and be able to add user authentication to it so that we can require someone to be logged in order to use our app. And maybe they're logged into, our internal workforce, like if this is for employees only, or maybe they're a customer of ours if we're making a customer-facing app. So we're going to talk about both of those things today and how we can do that using this built-in authentication to do it with as minimal code as possible. And yeah, we're going to do as minimal code as possible. And we're also going to try to be automating as much as possible, which means that, we're going to give you samples that you can just run a few commands and they'll set up everything for you. And you don't have to do anything in a portal. You just run those commands and you have this logged in application. That is our goal, to make it as easy as possible to add this user login to your applications. So we're going to start with James giving us a primer into identity and access management.
Okay, thanks, Pamela. Okay. So, this is going to be just enough identity to get you started. So really at the simplest level, when we talk about identity, we talk about identity and access management. So there's two halves to this. One is authentication. Who is the person and are they the person they say they are? And one is authorization. So identity, can I work out what the identity of this person is? And then when they want to go access a resource, do they have the permissions to do it? Because really it's about making sure that the right user gets to the right resource. Like that is as simple as we can make identity. There's two concepts: authentication, who am I? Authorization, am I allowed to do something? Now, what happens immediately when you think of identity is we have all these standards and we have a lot of complexity added in. So this is, again, let's try to look at the set of actors who take part whenever you're trying to have a user access your application. So if you look at the picture on the right-hand side, the resource owner is you, okay? You've basically created a resource server. So this is in identity terms. We talk about a resource server when we talk about a server. And what you're trying to do is that clients access that resource server. And the way they're going to do it is they use the authorization server. So the authorization server, in its case, in Microsoft, in our platform, that's Entra, is where all the users are stored. And whenever a client wants to access the resource, they first of all have to go to the authorization server, authenticate to it, sign in, and then they're going to get a token back from that, and they pass the token to the resource server. Now the resource server can look at that token and say, yep, I'm going to let that person in, or I'm not. So what does this actually mean? I talked about a token. The main token type you care about is an access token. So this is common if you're using OAuth 2 or OpenID Connect, so the standards that pretty much everybody uses to sign in today in modern applications. First thing is your client application is going to request a token. So they're going to hit an API on Entra, and what it's going to do is basically say, sign in. So it might pop up a login box. You type in some things, you type in your username, your password, or you give it a pass key, or you get a SMS, or you get a message sent your email, some way to authenticate you to make sure you're the right person. And then it's going to return an access token back to you. Now what the client app is going to do is going to call that HTTP endpoint and pass the access token over to it. And then if everything goes well, the data is returned back to you. So you've made an authenticated call. But what happens on the resource server? So the resource server now is going to decide whether or not it's going to serve you up that data. It's going to do two things. It's going to check authentication. It says, hey, have I got somebody who comes across, and is this the right person? And then are they allowed to do it? So at that point, there's going to be an authorization decision made, yes or no. So let's look at this access token again. So this is from the point of view of the client. Typically, an access token it's a blob of JSON. There are things called claims in there. Claims are basically statements. It's who issued the token, who the name of the subject is in the token, maybe what you want to do as a display name, what your email address is, what rights you have, what roles you might have. It's all bundled in there, and it's a standard set of claims. And essentially, the resource API is going to validate these claims, make decisions, and then return. So typically, it's passed in the HTTP header and the authorization header. So you'll see this bearer, and then there's a base64 encoded blob. That's basically a bunch of JSON that's going to be sent as a header. This is what is inside that JSON blob. And I'm showing three different sections here. There's three main types of data inside the access token. If you follow that link at the top, it gives you a comprehensive detail on what all these sort of short names mean, but we'll walk through a couple of them. The issuer, ISS, the second token down, the second claim down, just here, basically is who is the identity server that is issuing the token. It's got this GUID in here. We'll see this GUID later when we look at my application. This is my tenant, essentially. This is my tenant that's issuing the token. The audience is who I'm talking to. That should be you. That should be the resource server should have that ID. And then there are some other expiry and some other piece of information. There's then a bunch of claims around authorization. You can see things like roles and some others. And then there's a set of claims at the bottom, which are in orange. And these are for display only. So often if you think about some sign-in experiences you have, you might create an account and it's going to ask you some extra data. What's your name? Do you have a preferred name that we want you to call you by? They get sent across in the claim as well. The one thing to remember about these are never use them for authentication or authorization because the user can change them. The first two sets of claims are all generated by the identity server, and you can trust it. So I think there's a question in the chat I can see here from Cloud Bod. So does Entra ID pass on the token to the Auth token granting server to complete the claims? Yes, exactly. That's it. So remember that flow again. You, the client, talks to the authentication server. So to Entra, it passes back the token with the claims. You pass that over to the resource server, and In this case, so the follow-up is enter can only tell you the auth end part of auth Z will come from other server. In this case, these claims, so this catalog view full list, are actually roles that are inside Entra as well, so that you can have roles and you can have some of those. In some more complicated examples, you might use another server for fine-grained authorization. This is the simple example. In that case, your server would have to go and make another check. But in this case, we can make all the decisions by the claims we have here. So immediately we've gone from that very simple authentication and authorization into a lot of complexity. And the question is, like, how do I do all this validation? It seems very complicated. I need to check all these claims. I need to check who it's coming from. I need to check the user. I have to not misuse the fields. Is there a better way to do it? Well, the way we're going to show you to do it today is using the built-in authentication and authorization capabilities that Azure App Service and container apps have. So we're going to talk through the container apps example here today, but it's essentially the same technology. It's a component we call Easy Auth. And what it really does is it puts a little sidecar in front of your application that it intercepts all of the requests. And if that authorization token isn't on it, it's going to start a redirect out to Entra for you to sign in and then come back again. And then it's actually going to store the token. And what it will do is it will pass you back a cookie that basically maintains for the lifetime of your session. Next time you come in, you see the cookie, you're going to then be authenticated and all the way through. So it really gets rid of all of that token validation, all of the token handling that you had, and it makes your application very, very simple to write. So I'm going to pass back now over to Pamela, who's going to talk about how do you actually write the application now inside to use that built-in authentication.
All right, thank you, James. So yeah, so we want to actually use, set up authentication for an app. So the first step is that we do need to register our application with the Microsoft Identity Platform. That's how it's going to know what our application is and, be okay with giving tokens for it. So we're going to create what's called a Microsoft Entra application and also create a service principal for that application. Now, I think actually one of the most confusing parts about all of this is how many times we say the word application and that they tend to mean, they don't always mean the same things, right? So we're making this Microsoft Entra application, and that's what we can use that Microsoft Entra application from our backend application, our web application, in order to tell Microsoft Identity Platform, like, hey, this is who we are. We're registered with you, you know what we want, right? So you can do that using the Azure portal, but it's saying like, we want to do as much of the stuff with code, with automation that we can do. So one way we can do that is using the Graph SDKs. They are available in many languages because these are generated SDKs based off the API. So we were able to have them in C#, Go, Java, JavaScript, PHP, PowerShell, and Python, which is the language that I typically use. So this is what, we're using Python here in this example, but you can write very, very similar code in .NET. So we create a graph service client, and then we tell it like, hey, we want a new Entra application. So we give it a display name. We tell it the sign-in audience. This one is really, really important here because this is going to say whether it is like restricted to your organization or if you're going to let like anyone sign in. There's a bunch of options there, but you definitely want to make sure you've picked the right value there. Then we're going to tell it what the redirect URIs is so that it knows that when it's doing the login flow, it knows which URIs it can redirect back to, right? You don't want to just have a star there. I don't know if you're allowed a star there for security reasons, right? You want to tell it specifically, these are the only apps that you're allowed to redirect back to, so that your apps are the only ones receiving those redirects with the tokens. And then we're setting it up for OpenID, right? So this is all using OAuth 2, but also specifically we're using OIDC, OpenID Connect, which is a specific version of OAuth 2, which lets us do user login very easily using an OAuth 2 flow. So in order to set it up for OIDC, we do this enable ID token issuance. All right, so the ID token is a specific token that's used in these login flows with OIDC. So we want to say that is true. And then we also set up all of these scopes here, specifically this OpenID scope. But really, we want all of these if we're trying to do a user login flow. So all of this is important if we're trying to set up user login and log out. And yeah, so then we can actually run that to make an application. So here the example is this aka.ms/azai/auth-built-in, and we will post that in the chat. This is the primary example that we're going to be showing today that does all of this for you. And the code I just showed is in this auth-init.py. So it has all this code here that can create applications. So it first attempts, makes the graph service client, and then attempts to create an application. So I'll just run that now. I've already run it before, so things are set up, but you can see kind of the process that it tries to go through. So we're installing all the dependencies, like the Graph SDK mostly, and a couple other things, and getting all that set up, and then loading in some environment variables. And then it says it's setting up authentication for my Auth tenant, and checking if this application already exists, because this is what I set in my environment, and it already exists, so it's not creating a new one. So in this case, it didn't make a new one because it already existed. But I could try to make a new one right now. Let's just see. So AZM new one. All right, so I'm making a new AZD environment, and this AZD environment is so that I can make it like a whole new, resource group with application and all this stuff. So then AZM new, and then I'll just go ahead and see if it's going to succeed if I run this script in a brand new environment. Oh, but I didn't set up so I didn't follow any of the instructions whatsoever. So when you're setting this up, you do need to set various variables so it knows what to do. So for example, we need to set our auth tenant ID so it knows what tenant you're creating the application is, because sometimes you're going to create an application in a separate tenant from the tenant that you're using to make your actual Azure resources. So if that's the case, you need to, you just need to let it know, right? So in this case, I'm going to use, this is going to be my auth tenant. So I've set that up, and then I need to log in with that. I should already be logged in with that from a few days ago. And then I should be able to try it now. I'm shortcutting it a bit so that I can, show just the parts we're talking about in the slides. Okay, so now you can see setting up authentication for this tenant, using this credential for the tenant, detected a tenant of type AAD, which means this is like a workforce tenant. Creating application registration, waiting 30 seconds for the cache to sync. So that is useful because it takes a little bit of time for the application registration to propagate. So here it's definitely going to be waiting 30 seconds. So just lolly-daddle there. So that has so now it's adding a client secret. So that you need some sort of credentials for your application so that when you're using it, you can tell the Entra server hey, this is definitely my Entra application. I'm authenticating, with my correct credentials for it. So what we're using here is a client secret and a client ID. That is one option. And if you're doing that, you should be storing it in Key Vault and making sure to not expose your client secret. But there's other options as well, and we'll talk about some other ones as well. But this did make a client a new application, so I could actually go and I could go find it in my portal. So if I go now to my portal, So this is portal.azure.com. And I go here to my directory. So in my directory, I have this tenant here, which is the auth tenant. So that's the one I'm in right now. Okay, good. So I should actually just be able to paste this client ID. Yeah, so I just pasted it in the portal search bar and it found it. So you can paste things like your Entra application client IDs in the portal search bar and it should just find it. And you actually see it found two things. It found the application and then the service principal associated with that application. And the service principal is necessary for it to be able to take on certain actions. So here's the application. So we can go here and see how I have it configured right now. So you can see that for client credentials, it has a client secret and that has an expiration date, and you can change the expiration date. That has a value and an ID and all that. So this is what I'll be using in order to prove that I do own this client application. We can also look at the authentication. So this is where we can see the redirect. Currently, it's only set up with a localhost URL, but as part of our deployment process, we'll update that with the final URL. So I can show you one that has the, the final URL. This one has a container apps URL as well. So you'll generally want to make sure that you have redirect URIs for anywhere where your application is deployed, right? And yeah, we can look at other things like, where supported account types is my organization only. That's definitely something you want to make sure that we've done correctly. And there it is. So that is all set up. So that's a script that sets up an Entra application for you. And that is the first step to being able to use user auth on Entra. All right, so we registered, we set a secret, and we did that with the Graph SDK. We'll talk about other options later. So now we are registered the Entra, and now we actually want to do user auth using this OIDC flow. And this is a kind of a classic diagram of an OAuth flow with OIDC, where we have to have an OAuth leg 1 that sets up an authorization code flow and redirects to a URI, and then the user signs in, and then that redirects back to your app, and then your app exchanges an authorization code for a token, and then gets back this access token, and then finally you can render the web page. So there's a lot that happens in an OAuth to OIDC flow. And actually, what I just showed you was just OAuth. OIDC is really just that you're doing it with this particular scope, OpenID, email, name, like that. That would make it an OIDC flow. And that when at the end, you get back an ID token as well. So that's OAuth 2 plus OIDC, OIDC in the purple. So there is a lot going on in this flow. And we don't want to necessarily have every developer have to set up this kind of flow, because it is something that you can bungle. So that is why we have built-in auth as an option for Azure App Service or container apps, because it will do that whole flow for you, right? It'll intercept the request, figure out they're not logged in, and then do all the redirects, get the token, and do all of that for you. So that is what we're talking about today. Now, if you do need to do auth on other hosts like localhost, or you're deploying to somewhere other than Azure, you can still use Microsoft Entra for that. And in that case, you could use the MSL SDK. So that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. So if you are interested in that, come back tomorrow and we'll be talking about that option then. But today we're focusing on this built-in auth that's going to do this whole flow for us. So how do we set up this built-in authentication on container apps? So I'm going to do it with Bicep. This is Bicep here. If you haven't seen Bicep before, Bicep is what's called an infrastructure as code language, which means that we declare all our infrastructure using code, and then we're able to have repeatable provisioning of infrastructure. So we, declare everything we need for our app, and then, run a command, and Azure creates everything we need: our container apps, our Key Vault, our database, right? All of that. It's very similar to Terraform. So if you have used Terraform, Bicep is the, like Azure version of Terraform. You could also use Terraform for a lot of this. I'm not personally a Terraform expert, so I always use Bicep. because somehow I've become a bicep expert. So this is Bicep that sets up the built-in authorization for container apps. So what you can see is that we set things like where do we want the redirects to happen. So we say, oh, it's going to be redirecting to AAD. So we're using this Entra Auth. If the user is not authenticated, then you should redirect a login page. You have options like allowing anonymous and stuff. So there's options here for how you want authorization to be handled. And then we say who our identity providers are. So in this case, we're doing AAD. But there's other identity providers possible. And I saw that, there's a question about, Google and Facebook and stuff like that. So, you can check to see the other identity providers. Let's just look. So it's container apps. So if you're ever not sure, you want to see what your options are for Bicep, we can go and look for container apps, Bicep. Let's see. It curls. The hard thing about searching for Bicep is that it always thinks you're looking for strength training. That's okay. Maybe I am looking for strength training. Okay, so here we go. And, we can look here and see at the identity providers, and you can see that we've got Apple, there's AAD, which is what we're using, which is Entra. There is Azure Certic web apps, there's custom OpenID Connect, there's Facebook, there's GitHub, there's Google, and there's Twitter. James, are these all current? Can we actually use all of these today? Because I'm only experienced with AAD.
Yeah, so there's two places that you can configure adding more providers. So in this case, these all work, and you could enable as many of them as you want, and EasyAuth will look after it for you. Because most of these are social providers, so the accounts are stored elsewhere. So you could have local accounts in AAD, Workforce, and then you could allow others as well, and then again do that Alt-C for who wants to do it. We'll talk about external ID as well, which is where you actually store those user regs inside Entra as well, and it's a similar set that you can do. That one you're showing there of custom open OIDC connectors is essentially your get out of jail card. I mean, you can connect to anything behind the scenes there. Anything that any IDP that implements the OIDC provider, you can then go and talk to. Apple and Facebook are there because they're a little bit different. They actually require the way that you register things to be a little bit different. But with those OIDC connectors, you can connect to any identity provider you want.
Right. So that's really cool. So it gives you a ton of options. So definitely play around with that. And that, you're saying you could also configure it other places. So so let's if we were going to set that up, the next step, I would do is actually running AZD up. So usually I just run AZD up to do everything. So if I do AZD up, this uses the Azure Developer CLI, and it looks at all my infra, which is in these Bicep files here, and says, okay, I want an OpenAI, I want an Azure Container Apps, I want to set up some key storage, a key vault, all this stuff here. And then it would go through and do everything, including that auth config, right? And so I can run OCD up. I'm not going to do it today just because it takes a little bit of time to make all those different resources. But after running AZD up, what would happen is that I have a container app that has all of this configured, right? So here's the container app. And if we go to authentication, we can see that in this case, it says it's always going to redirect if we don't have a login. And I'm using an identity provider of Microsoft. And as James said, you can configure multiple places. There's also add provider here. So if we went to add provider, we can see tons of options here. So I don't see LinkedIn. Can you do LinkedIn with the custom OpenID Connect? Because that was a question in the chat as well.
I believe so. I would need to check.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so you can see everything else corresponded to what we saw in that Bicep. Let's So Twitter might be different, but Twitter isn't even called Twitter anymore. Who knows what's going on with Twitter, huh? So then you can see, so I've configured it with Microsoft, and this is my, client ID, and that's the same one I've got open over here. You can see that's the same client ID. And if I look at this, we can see that this is the client ID. And what I've done is that I'm storing the client secret inside a container app secret. And so that it's, it just knows where to find that secret, right? So we need to be careful whenever we're dealing with secrets that we're, storing them in as secure a place as possible. And so I tell it, this is where you can find the secret. And the issuer URL here, this is where it's going to, get those tokens from. This is my auth tenant ID. This is what, I set as the auth tenant ID, and I also did a login with that as well. And then we say like, okay, what are our requirements? And then, that's all set up there. If we look at the containers and the environment variables, we can see some, stuff around secrets. I've got a key vault that's storing secrets here. So it is all set up to be able to do built-in authentication here. Oh, here's the secrets. I forgot that secrets and container app secrets are stored in a separate place from environment variables, which is good. So this is where the secret is. So that's what it's going to use in order to check my credentials for the Entra application. So that's all set up. So that means I should be able to actually use this app with user login. So let's go ahead and open this up. And you can see I'm already logged in. So I'll just, test this, right? A haiku about OAuth 2. Authorization, secure access to data, OAuth 2 in play. Very good. And now let me try logging out just to make sure this whole flow is working. So I'm logging out this. And okay, I'm logged out. So now I'm going to go back and log in, pick my account. I can tell it's my other tenant because it's got this logo, because, with different tenants, you can set different logos. So this is not the main Microsoft logo. This is our, test logo here. And now it's telling me to do a two-factor. So this is the cool thing, is that, it can use any of the authentication mechanisms of Entra it's going to use. So we get a huge amount of security, right? Oh, and this one, wait, it's not matching. Let's see. So I must have bungled, just messed that up. So let me see, authentication. Let's check the redirect URIs for that one. And that looks correct. Let me refresh it. Aha, it lost it. Okay, I have to see why it lost it. All right, I'm gonna switch back to that environment. See if I can fix this programmatically first. And I'm gonna run the auth update script. And the auth update script, so I'll show you our azure.yaml. We've got, this is what does the whole AZDF process. And so you should be able to actually run this and have it done to everything. So what it does is, before provisioning, it does auth init, which is what creates the Entra application registration. And then after provisioning, it does auth update, which is where it takes the deployed URI and sets that as the redirect URI for the application registration. Because we have a bit of a chicken of an egg problem here, where the application needs to know the redirect URI, but the app that has the redirect URI needs to know about the application. So you have to have some sort of multi-step process where you create an Entra application, you deploy your backend application, and then you make sure they know about each other. So this is how we do it in this flow, and hopefully that has sorry, I reloaded the wrong browser tab. Okay, all right, so let me share again. Try not to reload this tab here. Okay, so can you share my screen again? Sorry, everyone. I reloaded the StreamYard tab instead of this tab here. Okay, so I reloaded it. So now we can see that, it does have this built-in auth URL. And so hopefully that way it is going to work this time. So let's go back and try it again and go back to our overview and get that URL. So it definitely is really important to set up the redirect URIs properly. It's really common to do that wrong, especially if you've got like different URLs, you've got like testing URLs and stuff like that. So you want to have some sort of mechanism for keeping those redirect URIs in sync. And there you go. So that worked there. And here we say, okay, oops, so embarrassed. My screen reloaded. See what it says in response. No worries. Thank you. Thank you, GPT. Okay. So that is all configured there. And yeah, that was mostly configured via Bicep with, a little bit of Python code that updated that redirect URI. And you can actually see that here where we set the redirect URIs and we set it to the URI here. Now, it's interesting that I have the localhost URL here because built-in auth is actually only for deployed. So I could probably just even remove the localhost URL because we really aren't using it since built-in auth is only going to work on our deployed application. I probably have that here because in other applications I do use localhost, but for built-in auth, you're only going to have the authorization flow working on, the deployed application, on app service or container apps. All right, so that was the Bicep. That's what it looked like configured. We showed it working. And yeah, actually, finally, let's show how the heck did I get my name to show up here, right? Because you see my name and you can see my name up here. So we just said that, that, Azure did all this authentication flow for us, but we seem to have also been able to get out a name. And this is what's really cool is that you can extract some details from the authentication flow that happened so that you can get out some useful things like name without having to do much extra work. So the way we did this was what happens is that Azure injects headers into all of the requests. So if you're doing, built-in authentication, it's going to inject a header into the request that has it has like all the like claims here, right? So what I did is I checked to see if XMS client principal is in the headers. And if it is, I look at all the claims that are in there and I get the name claim from there. And the name claim is one that we get when we do this Entra OIDC flow. So that could vary based off of what provider you use, right, James? Would we always have a name? Is that declared that you always have that from OIDC, or is this going to be Entra?
No, that's one of those the display headers that we showed at the bottom where there's a bunch of them. It could actually be the principal name, the name. So often the identity provider is going to look at all the bits it has and try to make up the best name it can for you. So in the actual configuration of our application, we can ask to get that display name and show it. If we didn't have it, then the IDP will probably just show you the email address. So
okay, would you always have a name claim and it would always be something?
You always will for Entra, but again, I don't know for other OIDC providers.
Yeah, right.
They may call it something different. Often they call it display name as the more common, like if we looked at all of these, we'll probably find that we get both name and display name inside that return blob of claims at the end.
Yeah. So the cool thing is you can get in all these claims, but you do need to investigate what ones are available based on the identity provider and figure out what you want to use. And so, we can take that out and then we just display that in our application. We pass it through to our template renderer. So I see there's a question that, is this the same for any app, or is there something unique for AI apps in this process? So this is actually the same for any app. So we, this series is securing AI apps, and we're using AI apps as examples, but everything we showed here, you could use for any application at all. We'll see next week how we can use those claims in order to do data access control for an AI RAG application, which is like chatting on your data. So we could look at the claims in the data and decide what you have access to based off those claims. So that would be more AI specific, but really everything we're showing here today, you can use for any of your applications. We're just providing a demo that is an AI app because many people are interested in, being able to deploy Azure OpenAI with Microsoft Entra at the same time, right? So that's what we have here. And we're sharing a link to the GitHub repo for everyone asking about that. All right, so now let's go to James for talking about external ID.
Great, thanks, Pamela. Okay, so that example of sort of Haiku is a great example. So Pamela was showing that in the context of your workforce. So that's people who are inside your company. And you might want to write a little app that shares haikus with people in your company, but you might want to I don't know, build haiku as a service and sell it. So what does that look like? Well, inside Entra, we have two concepts of two different types of tenant. One is a workforce tenant. This is typically what was Azure Active Directory. So this is for your employees. And this is used to access things like Outlook or SharePoint or Azure is from your workforce tenant. We also have a new second type of tenant called an external tenant. And this is for your external consumers and business customers. So what you don't want is like one big directory. Imagine the situation where you build your directory of all your employees and you set up Azure rules and stuff. And then you suddenly say, well, I've got 1 million customers. I'm just going to put them inside there as well. Well, they don't need to be able to access all your workforce resources. So what you really want to do is put them inside another tenant. So this is called consumer identity and access management, SIAM, typically it's called. And so this is whenever you're building an application. So inside Entra, we have a product, Microsoft Entra External ID, and it covers two of these use cases. It covers those external consumers and business customers in an external tenant. And then sometimes you have situations where you might have business partners, business guests, and they're inside your workforce tenant. So way back, Pamela mentioned, well, you might have a situation where you're using more than one tenant. And so this is where it comes in. So in the external ID case, we end up, it's a little bit more complicated in how to orchestrate all of this. And I think it's worth us diving into a little bit more detail. This is what we're going to try and create at the end. On the left-hand side of the screen is your workforce tenant. So this is where you, the admin, has your account, and you have rights to create resources inside Azure. On the left-hand side is all your Azure resources. In the center, your container app, and then all of the other resources that you had on the left-hand side. What we're going to do now is create another tenant or use a second tenant, which is an external tenant. And in there, we're going to put our app registration in there. Let me see. So this is your Entra tenant on the left-hand side. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create another tenant on the right-hand side, and it's where your app registration is going to be created. And that's going to have your app registration and a couple of other pieces in there as well. Now, remember when we ran that AZD command back at the very start, we ran it just with one identity. We signed in AZD Auth, and then we ran it and everything happened. It created the resources in Entra, it created the resources in Azure, it ran the init script to the AZD infra to deploy the infrastructure and then the update. With this, we have to do things a little bit differently because you as a user now have to log into two tenants. So when you think back to these access tokens that we talked about way at the start, we had an issuer. That issuer is the tenant. So you're actually going to have to get two tenants across the two sides. So let's walk. I'm going to walk through the steps. of what we actually did. So what we're going to do is we're going to, first of all, log into the external tenant, and that's going to get a token. And then we're going to have to run, in this example, one more script. So Entra, Microsoft Entra is configured via Microsoft Graph, and our AZD application doesn't have permissions to access Microsoft Graph. It only has permissions to access Azure. But what it does do is it has the permissions to go create a new application and a new service principal that's then allowed to go create the application, the external ID application. So it's a little bit of a bootstrap situation. What we need to basically be able to do is go create an application with the service principal inside Entra, and we can do that as me, as the admin. And then I'm going to use that in the next stage of calling AZD. And it'll be clearer when we show it. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to log into the workforce tenant. So I'm going to auth log in with a different tenant ID. And then so at this point, I essentially have a couple of different tokens. I have the blue token on the left-hand side that allows me to access my workforce. I have my purple token on the right-hand side that lets me access my Entra. And I also have a token for this service principal that's got extra permissions to go create things inside the external token. So now when I run AZD up, Pamela talked about the 3 stages of AZD up we care about: init, deployment, and then update. When we do the init, what we're going to do is we're going to use the token, the green token, to go create my application registration and some other objects we need. One of them is a user flow, and I'll show you the user flow when we go to the when we go look in the portal. The user flow really controls all that branding Pamela was talking about, like what your logo is. It also controls what sign-in methods you have. So email, OTP, so email and one-time password. So where when you log in, it'll send you a one-time password, SMS, and all of those other OIDC providers like Google and Facebook and Apple. You configure that in your user flow. So here's the point inside external ID where you can say, this application, here are all the things I want it to do. So I go off and create that. And then what I'm going to do is do the infra. It will now use my token that can talk to my workforce, and we'll go do all the configuration. And then at the end, the post hook, the update, is going to do that last configuration of the redirect URI. So what we've done is we've basically let AZD use different identities, use different tokens inside to talk across different tenants. And then what will end up is our users are actually created inside our Entra tenant, not on our workforce tenant inside. So to look at the code of how we're doing it, there's really one piece where we're going to use different built-ins, credential types, and connect to the different tenants. So if you look at this code snippet, I'm going to try and get a credential. These are the environment variables we talked about inside AZD. So what we're saying is if we have no external ID app created, then this is a workforce tenant. So I'm just going to call using the Azure Developer CLI credential. So that uses me. That's the little people one. Otherwise, if I am in external ID, I'm going to use the client secret credential with the client ID and the client secret of that green. So again, we're either going to use this one, the blue one, or we're going to use the green one, dependent on where we are. So let's go over to VS Code. Where's my VS Code? Yeah. And look at our init. So when we look at the main of our init, what we basically do is we are going to create the application. So again, that's completely common, but then we have this if, which basically says if tenant type equals SIAM. So this is what our tenant API returns if it's an external configuration. We're going to do some extra things. So we're going to go create some permissions, and then we're going to go create a user flow, and then we're going to add that user flow on. And so what a user flow is it configures what's put on the screen during sign up and sign in. We have a VS Code extension where we can kind of show this here. So let's look at the VS Code extension. This is my tenant. So you can see here's my tenant ID. You can see the tenant type. Inside here, we can see our applications. So this is my ChatGPT sample app. It looks exactly the same as the portal. So you can see those redirect URIs that are on here. You can actually see as well what scopes, what roles are granted for this application. And you can also see this user flow. So this has got details in here like, is sign up allowed or not? Which identity providers, which identity methods to use, so which auth methods. So here I'm saying I want my users to sign in with one-time passcodes over email. And also we can ask for some extra attributes collected. So what you see here is there is a built-in display name which maps to the name that we were showing. And what we're saying is we want to basically we require a user to do it. So what that will mean is during the sign-in flow, we're going to prompt for that. The two extra things we're doing, we're granting permissions to the app registration. You didn't see when if Pamela had logged in with an entire new user on the workforce, it would pop up and say, and you'll have seen this if you use Google or Apple or any other provider, it'll say, this application wants to read the following data from you. And it might be your email address, your name, etc. And that's very common. But in consumer applications, especially for some of these simple permissions that we're asking for, profile, we want to read your profile, we want to get a redirect token or a refresh token. What we're actually going to say is we're just going to pre-grant those beforehand so that the user doesn't get presented up with a window. Because in consumer apps, the fewer things that we flash up in front of people, the better it is. And then the other piece that we have to do is attach the user flow to the application. So user flows inside Entra are global across your tenant. So you might have one user flow that you use across 50 different applications. So we basically have this one call where we add the app to the application. So with external ID, there's a little bit more complexity, but it's all complexity in the deployment and the configuration. Your code is exactly the same. There was no change in our application. Entra external configurations and workforce configurations built on the same basis, have the same underlying features. They have some specific features for their use cases. So a lot of this user flow and configuration and branding are in external tenants. Just one word, so external ID, the way that Entra is normally priced for workforce is it's reasonably expensive. It's $6 per user for workforce because that's your workforce identity. That doesn't really work when you talk about, hey, I've got 1 million users who are logging in. So the pricing for external ID is consumption based on monthly active users. We give a pretty good free tier. Up to 50,000 monthly active users is free. And then over that, it's about 3 cents a user per month. We have some add-ons and we'll be adding more add-ons as well, and they get priced differently. But for the basis, for everything we're showing you, you just need the base tier and you have 50,000 free. Ravi is asking, can the same flow be used across other protocols, SAML and OAuth? You can connect user flows across multiple apps of different types. Right now, we're still finishing the SAML support inside external ID, so we haven't released the SAML support yet. We only have OIDC. We just GA'd it at build last month, so we're building it. But the same concept is there. You can do the exact same thing for SAML apps as well. So two last things, sort of what other things that are useful when you're doing this. I showed the Visual Studio Code extension. There's a AKA link there at the bottom for it. This lets you do a couple of things. It lets you create a tenant inside VS Code. It lets you browse the resources like I showed you. So I find this really useful when I have to remember what my tenant ID and my application ID is. If I need to cut and paste them into an AZD script, I can just go straight to the extension, grab the app ID, in this case, I grab the tenant ID and paste it in. We're trying to deploy and automate everything. We know some people use the portal for creating applications and configuring it, especially when you're doing it the first time. We have a similar sort of guided flow for all of this inside app service authentication. We're working on rolling it out to container apps as well, but this allows you to basically point and click your way through everything that we've shown you today. I think we're pretty short in time. I'm not going to demo it, but I think there is a video embedded if you download the slides. The TLDR is it's exactly the same. It works the same. Using the platform, you can write the same app if you're working for consumers or if you're building internal use cases, and your code is the same. So handing back over to Pamela to talk about the other upcoming improvements we have around how to manage identity. Over to you, Pamela.
All right. Thank you, James. Yeah, and we are short on time. We are allowed to go over. James might have something after, but we are allowed to go over in terms of YouTube. So this is an external ID demo. So here I'm signing in, and so here you can see it's with actually my actual personal email account, and this is my trial tenant, and I sign in. And this one I set up to be this one-time passcode flow, which is a really popular way of setting up consumer apps these days. So I get this email that sends me a verification code, and then I just paste that in. So I don't have even a password. It's just this one-time password flow, and then I'm logged in. So there you go. There's a demo, but there's other flows you can use as well. And you can set up Facebook and Google and all that stuff, depending on how you think your users want to sign in to your application. All right.
And you can allow the users to, the big other feature as well is you can allow the users to sign up as well directly. So in a workforce scenario, usually there's some like HR system behind the scenes that create the users. But in consumer scenarios, you want somebody to come to your website and go, oh, wow, I want a haiku. Let me sign up.
Right. Yeah. I think I set that one up this way because I don't remember adding Matt. I think I just sent him the link and look at that. Now he is a user. So here you can, get your, see your users in your tenant and, look at audit logs and all sorts of really cool things. So it's nice to see how easy it is to set up a consumer facing application. And it might seem complicated because what we're showing you in this session is we are showing you like all of the code. We're trying to explain how we kind of automated it and set it up. But if you're actually going to like run this sample, you can, look at the README here. It's actually only a few commands, right? It should be asd new, set your auth tenant. And then if you're doing enter external ID, we need a couple other things here, like your auth login endpoint. And then that script to run that James talked about, and then you run azd up. So, we're explaining all of the code here so that to try and, help you understand what's going on behind the scenes in case you need to tweak it and debug it or anything like that. But we've tried to make it so that you can actually follow this process and get something up and running really quickly. So if you are interested in this, I do encourage you to actually go through this README and try it out afterwards and just file any issues that you have so that we can improve it and make it easier for other people to get up and running with either Entra ID or Entra external ID. And okay, so let's see. Now talking about, actually, there we go, upcoming improvements. So, I showed how we could do bicep, but then we had all this Python code with the SDK in order to create the application registration and create the client secret and all that. However, there is now a graph provider for bicep, meaning that we can create Microsoft Entra applications and other graph objects using bicep, which means, for those of you who really like having infrastructure as code and don't want to necessarily be like messing with Python code or .NET code or whatever, you could conceivably write all of this using bicep instead. And I have a branch where I've done this for one of my repos. And I haven't, merged it in yet because I'm showing it as an example, but you can check out that branch there if you want to see how I do it. But basically, like, this is really similar to the Python code I showed, but this is now Bicep code where I'm saying, here's my redirect URI, here's the scopes that we need, right? This is setting up all the Entra application for OIDC, and then creating a service principal here. So we can now create service principals with our Bicep code. And now the next tricky thing is how to do credentials. We cannot create client secrets in Graph. And that was partly for technical reasons, but also partly because we're trying to move people away from client secrets, because that is, using keys, and keys are very subject to being leaked and not being rotated enough, and all the risks of using keys. So we are trying to move things away from secrets and keys and, forever passwords, and, towards, doing better forms of authentication. So what's going to be available in the near future is that you'll be able to use a managed identity as a federated identity credential. What this means is that you will not have any secret you need to store. And that is so nice because you don't have to deal with setting up a key vault and rotating secrets and making sure there's no secrets in your plain text, because there are no secrets. So what you do is that you create a managed identity for your app service or your container app. And we talked about that in actually the first session of the series. So you create a managed identity, and you can just do it like this right here. This makes a managed identity, and I can assign that to my container app or my app service app. And then I tell I say like, oh, I want to be able to use that as a federated identity credential. So I set it up using this federated identity credentials resource type here. And, I say what the OpenID issuer is going to be, and that the subject is the principal ID of the identity. And that means that can now be my form of credential when I'm doing Microsoft Entra application. So this is not available yet, but hopefully will be available in the near future. I don't want to promise any particular dates, but it's already available internally at Microsoft as we're testing it out. We're just waiting to be able to bring it out to the world. And it's really, really nice. It's a great fit with built-in Auth. It's because you can set everything up, right? As you saw, I had the Bicep for built-in Auth. So here you can set up everything for built-in Auth. Now, we are still waiting to be able to do everything for external ID, right, James? So we're not quite going to be able to use this for external ID.
Just like you showed for the application in preview in Graph, we're sort of working across all the resources. So both for federated identity credentials and for the external ID bits, we're working across both.
So we're actively working on this. So if you're doing built-in Auth and you're doing it with Entra ID for your workforce, then you will be able to just use Bicep only with federated identity credentials when it becomes available for everyone. And if you do need external ID, then just give us a little more time. And really, to configure the built-in Auth, looks really similar to how we did it before, except that instead of telling it where the secret is, there's no secret. We instead just give it this special magic string that says, hey, there's no secret. Just use the managed identity instead, and go find the client ID. So you just use this magic string instead, and it will use the managed identity as the credential. Okay, so once that is actually fully available, we can just redo the series, and then we'll be able to show everything using Bicep, which will be really, really cool. So for next steps, I'm saying you can get started, try this all out with our samples. The big one that we showed today is this one, aka.ms/azi/auth-built-in. We posted in the chat. We can post in the chat again. And this implements using Azure Developer CLI to run all of the scripts and do all the deployment with Bicep. We also have this aka.ms/ragchat, and this uses both built-in Auth and MSL, so that we have all the options available for us. So when deployed, it uses built-in Auth, and locally it uses MSL. And we'll be talking more about this one in the Wednesday session. But if you wanted to see an example that kind of mixed different options together, that is a good example. And that's also the one that has data access control that we'll be talking about. And yeah, and we have lots of other AI samples as well if you're interested in AI samples. There's many places where you can read more in the documentation. I read these documentations all the time because I'm always trying to understand OAuth 2 and OIDC better and better and better. And it's just, there's so much that you can, potentially explore with the space of authentication. So you can check out Entra, you can check out the new Graph Bicep, you can read about built-in authentication on container apps or app service, whatever it is that you need to get started with your applications. And then join us for the rest of the series. So this week, we're going to be doing more user login. The week after will be data access control. And then after that, we'll be doing virtual networks. And that is what I have. We are over time, but if there are any additional questions that we didn't get to, looks like we're both still here. So I think we could answer some questions if there's anything we missed here. So I did see there's a question. Yeah, did you see it too? Go.
There's one from Ravi. Can manage identity extend to non-Azure runtimes like a GitHub runner? The feature is called Workload Identity Federation. If you search for it, it works from GitHub. It also works from AWS and GCP. So that Workload Identity Federation is a sort of generic standard for how you can exchange a token from one IDP for a token for another. So you can be in a runner and say, hey, this repo is allowed to access this VM because maybe it's going to go fire off some tests on it. So you can define that mapping in the token exchange, and it works across cloud. Yeah. Did you see any other ones, Pamela?
Yeah. So Balto asked how do you configure Auth so that you have to click on the number in Microsoft Authenticator?
I saw that one. I actually don't know, and I have to come back. So I often wonder this as I log in all the time, and there is a difference between Workforce accounts and Microsoft accounts. So if you log in with your Microsoft account, your Outlook.com account or whatever, and you log in with your Workforce, one of them shows you the number and one of them doesn't. I know that we did a bunch of research way back when on whether it was more secure to show the number or to not show the number. I think the belief was it was more secure to not show the number, because if somebody does spams you with authentication request and you see 3 numbers, you just click one to get rid of it, and occasionally you might get right and you might let the bad guy in, but you'll never type a number in. So I believe we're moving towards typing in the number everywhere.
All right, good question. And then Robbie asked, how is fine-grained access control implemented when using external identity? So the fine-grained access control, I assume you're talking about the data access control in the presentation coming up, because that's what we're talking about in the chat. We actually have not brought in external ID for that solution yet. If I have time in the next 9 days, I will try to bring it into that solution, because now that we figured out how to do it for this app, we want to bring external ID into our other examples as well. Yeah, we haven't actually done that yet. So I'd have to consider, like, because if you can have arbitrary users sign up, then probably you wouldn't grant those users access to view random documents. Like this is like for a RAG chat application, but you would allow them to view their own documents. So with arbitrary users, you would still be able to associate their, if you're doing like user uploaded documents, you'd be able to associate that with whatever ID is identifying them in your Entra page. So you could definitely let them chat on their own documents based on matching their user IDs here. If you're going to let them, view other documents, you just have to know about them, right? So, so it's a little different from Workforce.
Just dropped the link in the linked a chat in as well. Essentially, I think somebody pointed out in the chat, Entra doesn't really have fine-grained access control. It has coarse-grained access control. Typically, we have a lot of partners who will do the authorization piece, and I linked to a blog post we wrote recently with Serboss, who have a Auth and ABAC, attribute-based access control authorization service, and it shows exactly how you use Entra ID for the authentication, and you use SerBoss for the authorization. The great thing is, because these are common standards, it all interacts back and forward. So how you check for the claims and how you put it back and forward. So so often, well, like the generic case is you might have to use a fine-grained authorization. I think as Pamela's looking up right now, some of our data systems have got more fine-grained authorization, but that then you're really depending upon the resource itself implementing it, and not every resource implements it. So sometimes you might want to wrap it yourself with your own fine-grained authorization.
Yeah. So this is a big question that we're actually, I think we got this question a lot at Build too, was about fine-grained access control. So
there's lots of great partner solutions that work well with external ID.
Okay, so yeah, so definitely look through this. I haven't read this yet. If you're talking about sensitivity, like you might be labels, you might be thinking about SharePoint. And we were actually chatting with the SharePoint team last week to figure out how we would do that with the RAG application, because they do have an API. So you can, in theory, if you're trying to integrate with SharePoint, you could use the API to get out sensitivity levels and then make decisions based off that. I haven't done that yet myself, but it looks like it's possible. Oh, this is even under the Graph API. Interesting. Oh, because it's SharePoint in Graph. I have not used this
all of sort of M365 is configured via Graph.
I see. Cool. Yeah. So there's definitely a lot of things to explore here. Great questions. All right. I think we've covered the questions here. So thank you, James, for bringing all your expertise about Entra, and thank you everyone for your engagement and questions and comments. And we hope to see you at the next one.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Pamela. And we do this and we do the automation so you don't have to know about the authentication and authorization concepts, and you can forget about it and you can click the button and it all gets set up properly. So, but this was a little bit more of a deep dive into how we set it all up and all the work we do. And I think we're always trying to make it easier, like all of these steps that you have to jump through. We really want it to be AZD off, AZD up. That should be your application.
That's the goal. Try it out. Let us know.
Yeah, please. And raise comments on the repos. You've got the links.
Sweet. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Thanks for another awesome session to our presenters. You can learn more about the series and view past episodes at the URL at the bottom of the screen. We are always looking to improve our sessions and your experience. If you have any feedback for us, we would love to hear what you have to say. You can find the link on the screen or in the chat. Today's event code is 23007. We'll see you for the next episode.